Hey, Lisa.
Hey, Dan.
This Wise Heart at One series is awesome.
It is.
Having such a good time with it. I want to spend a little bit more time with it. Maybe we should create something.
That's a great idea. Maybe something like a study guide?
A study guide?
Yes.
That sounds awesome. Where would I get that at?
Well, actually, if you go over to soulmakers.org/BeMakeDo, you can download a free Wise Hearted One study guide right now. It's got lots of great questions, some word studies, and a little bit of commentary for you and maybe a group of people to go through together.
That's awesome. Guess what I'm going to do right now?
What are you going to do?
I'm going to go to soulmakers.org/BeMakeDo.
And download your free study guide. Well, hello. Welcome to Be Make Do, a Soul Makers podcast, where we explore what it takes to live out your call in the arts with spiritual wholeness and creative freedom. I'm your host, Lisa Smith, here with my producer, Dan ABH.
Hello, everyone.
And it is our passion to encourage you to become who you were created to be, make what you were created to make, and do what you were created to do. So, this summer, we are exploring some of the questions that came out of the Wise Hearted One series in our previous podcast episodes about the artist's call of Bezalel in Exodus. And don't forget, the discussion guide is available on our website if you're interested in going deeper with that. But today, we are talking with Veronica Scarpellino of Goldfinch Leadership to talk more practically about one of the issues we raised in that series, and that is the challenges artists can face around measuring the impact of our work and overcoming the obstacles that make us doubt. So I'm really excited to have Veronica with us here today. She is a formally trained coach and artist who incorporates creative sensibilities as a leadership and executive coach. She's the founder of Goldfinch Leadership, which supports small and mid-sized businesses and creative professionals to leverage creative problem solving, emotional intelligence, and an ethical business sense. With over 20 years of immersive experience and formal coaching, she specializes in guiding professionals through transitions, emphasizing the transformative potential of creative thinking. So welcome, Veronica. You are the person we definitely want to talk to today. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for inviting me, Lisa.
Yeah. I was very excited to come across your work and the way that you integrate creative thinking and practices and really value that within business, but also the way that you're able to talk with creatives about the business that they do. So you kind of sit at a really unique vantage point, which is so needed.
Yeah, unsiloing between the idea of being in your studio and being at work is really important.
Yeah.
And also dispelling the myths that we have around what it means to be creative and inviting more definitions and more people into that identity of being creative.
Yeah.
That's one of my missions.
Well, okay. So one of the first things I was curious about was for you to tell us a little bit about the need that you see that led you to this current work that you've developed. I'm guessing you see a lot of people who feel stuck or doubt their impact or just are facing challenges that seem overwhelming. I mean, is that something that you struggled with or you notice? Why is that so important for you personally?
Yeah, and I'm really glad you started with those universal pains that we all feel, because regardless of whether you're in the medical industry or a creative in design or fine art, these are universal experiences that we all have. And so part of it was a personal journey for myself, an unlearning of different definitions of ways of being. And, a sort of, re-envisioning of what my own identity is. As a small child, I loved art. I loved making, and it felt really fulfilling. But all around me, I had family members who were experts in all of their different fields, whether it was medical or science and engineering, or in something that's more tangibly creative. And the what was evident through my experiences with these family members was that the doctor was also a painter and a carpenter. The science guy, who was really into engineering, also loved to build and cook and host parties. Another engineer was also amazing at drawing, building Legos, and solving problems. And so growing up, there was just this overarching creative experience. Then I get into college where I really start feeling the pinch of the siloing that happens, the level of expertise, but also the exclusionary aspect of it, right? An artist is this and is not this. So I followed along, as a student. This is what you do. You take the advice of your the experts in your field. But it didn't quite sit right, and I never was able to identify that. Well, flash forward, the early 2000s, I just moved to Philadelphia, and I was really making a go of being a fine artist. My medium was found object mixed media sculpture, things that were discarded, repurposing them, putting new life into them, giving them new meaning. It was really gratifying. But I was also, for years, had been working in galleries, museums, working with artists. And it was that peek behind the curtain that didn't really sit well with me. And I realized this isn't really the path that I want to take in being a professional artist. And it became an identity crisis.
Right.
If I'm not an artist, who am I? What am I? But I still didn't have an alternative. So I continued to support creative people, artists, and creative businesses. Founded my own company, helping artists to stand up the systems that they needed to run it as a business. That led me into working with other creative businesses that were a little less artist, but more craftsman. And that led me into working in higher education, helping artists and designers chart a career path. So kind of bringing things back together. And it was at that advent of discussing how to make a living as an artist, not just as a visual artist, but as somebody with a more marketable skill set, where it really started to smack me in the face again about this unsiloing. And I became frustrated with how creative individuals could be exceptional in the studio. But when it came to something like envisioning their own career path or writing a resume even, they would shut down. I can't do this.
Yeah.
When it's the same rules, it's the same structure, it's the same tactics translated into a different area. And so when I founded Goldfinch Leadership, one of the things I was very intentional about was not working exclusively with creative people who had a traditional creative output, but working with the mindset of being creative. So I don't care if you're an accountant, an engineer,
right,
a consultant or coach, but there is a very creative process that's involved in all of these fields, and helping both sides, the very artistically creative people, identify how to apply those skills outside of the studio, and helping the very analytical, experty mindset recognize what they're doing already is creative and how to apply that to other areas of their life where they're uncomfortable. It's incredibly gratifying, more so than the art making had been. This was my new craft, my new medium. And my new identity shifted from being, I am an artist, to I am creative, which became way more empowering.
Interesting.
Because if you're creative, when you're faced with that obstacle, when you're overwhelmed, you trust yourself to have the tools and the know-how to figure it out.
Right.
And because of that iterative process that you take when you're an artist, you try again, plan B, learn from a mistake, prototyping, iteration. And it is really empowering and a place to really make strong moves from.
Yeah. There's two things that popped out from, there's so many questions that actually are coming to mind as you're talking. But the first thing, when you were talking about working as a found object artist and seeing things and then helping them to have new life and become something different. Like I see the parallels between what you were doing as a visual artist and what you're doing now in your business. And I think that is such a great example of what we talk about in the Make What You Were Created to Make, that it's not just the artifact that you create or that thing that you do. It has also to do with who you are and the gifts and the way that you see the world. And then that calling, that piece of your calling will show up, in lots of different ways over the course of your life and career. And you can understand that you're still being true to your calling. It's just manifesting in a different way, which is so typical for artists.
Right.
Because you're always exploring something new. That's what kind of keeps us energized in a way.
Right.
So it's cool to see that through line for you. I can see it really clearly.
I love that you spotlighted that, because I agree. Repurposing things, collecting information, never knowing where you're going to use it.
Right.
And, it's almost like I can save information and pass it along to those that need it. Or a really important process in creative thinking is to be able to find innovative solutions. And if you don't have the right tools at your disposal to do that, you can't move forward. A carpenter can't build a table without a hammer and a saw and in some form a binding element.
Right.
Well, to create a solution, if you don't have an experience, a piece of knowledge, or that object to relate to, you don't have the tools to make those associations. I mean, some of the most amazing innovations in the world came from outside of the domain of expertise. Velcro came from looking at nature. A lot of it comes from looking at nature, in fact. But the repurposing of ideas is one of the creative processes that I work through with my clients.
Wow, I love that. Well, so you brought up probably the number one stress point for artists, which is how do I make a living as an artist? And that I can't do marketing, or I don't know how to write an art statement, or it's just so overwhelming to me. But you said, well, you already have the skills. What could you talk a little bit more about that, just briefly, to kind of whet our appetite?
Sure. So one of the first steps, and I still battle with this. So this is not like I found the solution and I've got an easy pathway in front of me. But one of the mindsets that you can take is that the creative process unfolds in all of these areas. Mm-hmm. And if you're creative, you can do it in these other areas. So whether it's sales or marketing, part of it is finding the right way of framing it for yourself that feels authentic and leans into your strengths. And where you're not strong, you're recognizing that and filling those gaps in one form or another, hiring somebody, partnering, using a tool, right? Those are great solutions. But let's say, for example, that in the studio, you're really comfortable with the idea of setting constraints for yourself. Because if you're told that you can make any piece of art you want in any medium, any topic, any colors, there's no budget. Spend what you need. Oh, and take as long as you need to do it. That's pretty paralyzing.
Yeah, exactly. I was like, freeze.
Right.
It sounds great, but it's freeze.
Right. Yeah. But if you have constraints, or you put in false constraints of, it has to be of this size, this medium, these colors, one topic, and I have a week to do it. And I also have $10. It might seem counterintuitive, but those constraints end up creating the atmosphere for immense creative freedom.
Yeah.
And so setting constraints is a tactic. It's a creative thinking tactic that can be applied in other areas too. So when you're overwhelmed by marketing, pick one audience member. And by that, I mean an individual. Pick a person to speak to.
Right.
What's the one message that you want to get across? Can you do it in one paragraph?
Right.
And you have 1 hour to put this together. and then walk away, just like you do in the studio. Walk away, come back with fresh eyes.
Right.
And then set new constraints. 15 minutes, and we'll sit down and work on this.
Yeah. I'm writing so many notes down right now.
But that's just one tactic that you can borrow from your studio work and apply to another area of your business.
Yeah, that's so great. I think that's really important to, I mean, that kind of gets to something else, which also goes into this conversation, understanding and valuing what creativity is. Like, I find a lot of creatives don't necessarily, they feel like they get to do what they do and don't stop and maybe think about all the hours that they've spent in developing these very specific techniques and skills and abilities that, yes, are translating to something on the page or on the stage or, you know, in the arena or whatever, wherever you are, but that they actually translate into a whole other, slew of areas, and that, and it transforms the way that they see the world. And so that also kind of shows up in the way that they are with people and in what they're saying and what they're contributing to the world. I'm sure, like, part of your business is talking with, business professionals, those that are not artists, to encourage creativity and to show them that they are creative. And that in church circles, there's a lot of that too, encouraging people. Because we're saying you need to engage your creative abilities, and people are afraid of that. So we spend a lot of time encouraging them. Yes, you are creative. But on the flip side of that is, those people who have spent a lot of time and energy developing those creative skills and abilities, and those also who are just kind of naturally, you have superpowers in that area. And I think sometimes for artists, I'm finding that because there's so much encouragement that everyone is creative, they kind of forget that not everybody can do what they do. Like everybody can do math, but I would have to work really hard to do it really well. I have a certain level of ability, but then I have to work, I need to work with somebody like you to really build up my capacity for that. And so, yeah, I just wonder if you could talk a little bit about that, about what's required to develop and why it's valuable.
Mm-hmm. You just brought up, again, now it's my turn to say, you just brought up a slew of things that
okay, go for it.
I want to react to, but you're talking about a level of mastery.
Yeah.
Taking a strength that you innately have and bringing that to mastery, which can lead to flow. That idea of just almost channeling and not having to think about the muscle movements, the tool, because that's so ingrained in you. You get to go next level to the idea and the process and not have to think about each step along the way. And mastery can be gained in all kinds of domains, even outside of the creative arts. And, when you're talking about artists and how everybody can be creative, one of the things that I'm careful about when I talk about creative thinking is that it's a thinking style. Art is one expression of creative thinking, but it is not the only expression of creative thinking. So somebody can be very creative, but be a terrible artist.
Mm-hmm.
And somebody can be incredibly creative and be an amazing artist.
Right.
So it's your area of expertise. It's also where you spent your time developing that sense of mastery, hopefully in a way that leans into your personal thinking style. So some of us are really good at what's called divergent thinking, where you can come up with a lot of ideas. And many artists and very creative people have no trouble coming up with ideas. And in fact, they could give them all away and still have oodles pouring out of them.
Right.
For them, the challenge is, which one do I choose first? And how do I start it? And how do I follow that through to execution?
Yeah.
So for the creatives that are really good at divergent thinking, that's the challenge that we work on together. How do you move toward actual execution? Making this idea into a reality. Then there's another thinking style that's really good at convergent thinking. And those are dealing with the facts and figures, the reality and the practicality of things. And those, if you're ever talking to somebody about it, this great idea you have, and they say, well, it's never been done before, so no, we can't do it. Or we don't have the budget, or we won't get approval for that. There's somebody who's probably really good at convergent thinking. They're very practical. You need both. You need to be able to conceptualize and then drive forward with action.
Right.
So for many of the people who are very good at convergent thinking, they can be creative within their domain, but maybe they can learn how to be a better divergent thinker. And I see a lot of people who talk about creativity dwelling specifically around the idea of brainstorming, coming up with new ideas, new solutions. And that's great for the convergent thinkers.
Right.
The artists, the great divergent thinkers, don't need to come up with more ideas.
Right.
They got it. Enough with the ideas. And no, you can't do all of them at once. And no, your finished, beautiful idea has to start somewhere.
That then brings us to this idea of success. You're talking about these divergent thinkers who have lots of great ideas, and you have great visions and hopes for what this baby that you have birthed or are birthing is going to do out in the world. And even just sometimes that's just that it's going to be meaningful and touch somebody. But it could be anything from that to I'm going to be famous, or, I'm going to have an exhibit in this space or whatever. I think for those in the arts industries, it can be challenging to define success, to know there's this never ending wheel. It feels like sometimes of what you can do or what you need to do in order to feel like you've accomplished something, feel like you've made an impact, feel like you're successful. But it's not the same thing as selling a widget necessarily. And I think sometimes it can be challenged, especially in the 21st century in the United States, to be, in your gut. I would say most artists feel like if I create the thing and I release it into the world and somebody experiences it and enjoys it, like that was what it was meant for. God's going to use that however. But also there's like, how many followers on social media? How many likes did I get? Is anybody talking about it? Can you talk a little bit about how to think about success or impact in ways that maybe are helpful and not paralyzing, especially for those in creative industries?
So I would say success can't be defined for you. You have to define success for yourself. And that sounds great, but how do you do that? One of the first things that you can do, a real practical exercise, is figure out what you value, what's important to you. And there are a lot of wonderful tools online that you can go to go through a values exercise. They usually start with a generated list of words that you read, and you pick out the words that resonate for you. And not the words that you think are supposed to resonate for you, but the words that actually do.
Yeah.
And, money is one of those things that is elusive at times, but pursuit of money itself that's a pathway for pain. So why do you want the money? Underneath that, your core value may be something like personal freedom. It might mean safety. It might mean family. So underneath money or wealth is this idea of what your core value is. And when you release the specific idea and go to the core value, that's your aspiration. That's what really drives you. That's the truth. And without that specific outcome, you'll find ways to fulfill that truth in an array of ways that may include money, but also include something else.
Yeah.
So that can start to help reframe and change your mindset around what success might mean. I was reading a book that challenged me to redefine what wealth meant, that it wasn't necessarily something that meant money. And autonomy over my time is an amazing source of wealth. Time
Right.
with my family. I have a small child that I want to spend quality time with. That's a really important element of what would mean for me to be wealthy.
Yeah.
And yes, like financial freedom and security for my family. Those are core values that drive everything else. That clarity can be a really strong guiding point for anybody and for
Yeah.
artists. The never-ending wheel that you were describing, that chasing of the next thing, I mean, that shows up everywhere. That shows up in every industry at all levels. And one of the methods that you can apply to stop the wheel is to reflect and to celebrate. Because if you were to sit down every week and review all of your accomplishments, small and large, and acknowledge how far you'd come in 1 week, that pressure to chase the next thing isn't so dire.
That is so huge. Celebration is, we talk about how bad we are at that all the time.
Yes.
Dan, I see your face.
I was waiting for a comment.
Yeah, what's going on there?
It's very resonating to hear that. And I think you're 100% right, Veronica, about okay, first of all, we try to do this with the podcast where we're like, okay, what's next? And then sometimes we'll pause every quarter to be like, okay, hold on, let's have some successes here, right? So, and it feels really good. It makes you feel more grounded when you do that. And I'm a musician, and I'm in a few bands, but one of my main bands, we try to do this all the time with, and it is helping us as a band collectively. So all members in it. But yeah, that really resonates a lot. I do want to bring up the difficulty of what it takes to reach the goals for success. And like I always say, we get artist fatigue.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And so here's a question for you. How do you know it's worth it? Like, how do you keep going when it's hard, when you have that artist fatigue where you do the show or you do the thing, and then all of a sudden the next day you have to upload things for syncing and do the marketing piece and do 50 hours of social media and all that? I guess what I'm saying is that how do you know when to quit or when to push through? That one's for me. That one's for me, Veronica.
No, and so I'm trying to like, do I go big picture or do I just talk to you? So there's so many things that you were saying that jumped out. And, when you have a show and you want your instant gratification for how many people showed up and how many people are like dancing and applauding. And I will tell you, I'm one of those frustrating audience members who sits there quietly, but I'm taking it all in. So, back to that idea of the thinking styles, you can't judge everybody through the same filter. So you never know what your reach is because that quiet person in the back might be your biggest fan. So that's one thing. There's also, and whether you're putting on a big art exhibition, throwing a party, having a gig, there's that crash that happens afterwards. That you have your anticipation, you have the event itself, and often we don't give ourselves the attention necessary for the aftermath of it, and recognize that the arc of the emotions that goes through that is different for everybody too. You might think of it as one stagnant event, but it's actually, if you think of it, it's broken into three. The lead up, the anticipation and preparation for it. Some people, that's where they get stuck. The event itself. You think in terms of like, are you an extrovert, an introvert, an ambivert? Some people get really energized by the event itself. Others, though they like people, it's draining. And so then the aftermath. What do you need afterward to process what just happened? Do you need to keep going? Extroverts want to like go and have, the after party. Introverts are like, don't talk to me. I'm going to melt into a puddle as soon as the door closes, and I just need that time to process. And both are okay because they're what you need. But who else needs to be enlisted in this? Are they somebody that you need to enlist for support because you need, like, don't let me cancel, because that period ahead of time is where I have my anxiety. Once I get through that, I'm great. So don't indulge me and offer to cancel. Okay. That's one example. You're at the event. You have somebody who's keeping an eye on you and they see that you're starting to get overwhelmed or that you need to be reined in. What can they do? And then that aftermath, how can you support each other to give each other that space and what you need? And where can you find that balance? So, that can help with the artist fatigue in the moment. But when you go to the next day and you have your crash from, what else am I going to anticipate? Well, you're not excited about uploading 50 files. Can you gamify it? What can you do that's within your strength to make it something a little bit more interesting until you can pawn it off on somebody else, right? Until you can delegate it. And there are a lot of what I call creative intelligence tactics that you need to deploy. And in my definition, because this is a phrasing that I'm using for lack of better wording, creative intelligence is using your emotional intelligence, your self-awareness and ability to self-regulate as the pathway to greater creative thinking. You can't think expansively and creatively about possibilities and the future if you're in survival mode. Yeah. If you're in fight, flight, or freeze, you're in survival mode. But within that is information. What artist hasn't been immensely frustrated with the process? That frustration is actually crucial. So it's not like you want to avoid it. You want to use it. You want to learn from it. And you want to use it as a catalyst. Right? So creative intelligence is the synergy, the power of your emotions powering your creative thinking, which in turn generate emotions, which in turn go into creative thinking.
Yeah. I really love the way you explained the whole process. It's like systematic, but like in a good way. Like it's systematic where every, the introvert and the extroverts and the beginning, the middle, the end, the after party. It's so weird because I feel like I think a lot of artists try to think that way until the thing is happening. And then when the thing is happening, it's like whoosh, amnesia. Here comes the doubt. Here comes the fatigue. Here comes, was it good enough? Here comes, you know what I mean? I really, really love what you said.
It's a process, and it's not something that you figure out and never have to think about again. And like with anything, you're going to suck at it at first. You're going to fail. You're going to fall flat on your face. But if you're able to reflect back on it and say, oh, that's where I went wrong, then you have a greater likelihood the next time it comes up to be like, oh, wait, this feels familiar. Now that I'm paying attention to it, now that I'm paying attention to the number 23, I see it everywhere. Right. Now that I'm thinking about red cars, they're all over the place. Yeah. Now that I'm thinking about frustration, wow, I didn't realize throughout the day I get frustrated so much. What happens after?
Yeah. It's very spiritual in a sense to do that. It's like reflection, discernment,
Mm-hmm. And an interesting thing is that if you can imagine a future event and what you want to have happen, your brain doesn't know that it didn't happen yet. So it's almost like you're practicing for it. And then when that event starts to happen, you're much more likely to do the thing you planned than to go with your old habitual pattern. But that's the thing. It's a habitual pattern. Those are hard to break. They're really ingrained. It's like I'm not a neuroscientist, but the neural pathways are like the beaten path of your brain, or the grooves in a record, if you will. You're going to want to go down that path. Right. It's just the least resistance. Building a new one. If you start walking a new pathway through the woods, at first it's going to be difficult.
Right.
Over time, that will start to beat down and will become easier to walk, and the old path will start to grow over. And that's sort of like what happens in your head. So it takes time. But that old path, that can be picked up again and reinforced very quickly.
Yeah, let's not go that way.
Well, that's why it's so helpful to have tools and frameworks and structures that help you. Like I relate to that because I'm a crash person at the end. But 3 weeks ahead of time, I'm not thinking that. I have a lot of energy this week. So on my calendar, I might schedule a bunch of stuff, and then I get there in that crash zone and I have a full week. And I think, why did I do this to myself? And now I'm so dragging and I just want to cancel everything. And I've started to observe that and try to be really disciplined. Like the calendar becomes a tool for me.
Yes.
I will write on there, nothing,
Same.
Yep. So I'm wondering, other tools, like even people, I would think you kind of mentioned that of having the people around you sort of helping to encourage you to go down a particular path as opposed to a different one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And sometimes the people you need the help from are the ones that ruffle your feathers the most.
Uh-huh.
Right? So one thing that you can do in that regard is to assume good intention
right.
from them and understand they're not doing it to you. They're being themselves. That they're different. They think differently. Yeah. And when you're interacting, having that communication before it's a crisis, before emotions are involved in it, and saying, listen, next week we have this thing coming up. And knowing myself, and you've probably seen me do this, I'm going to have a little freak out for the 2 hours before it. I'm going to want to bail. Yeah. Don't let me do that. Here's what I need you to do. Give them the tools to support you. Mm-hmm. Or, after the event, I really want to be able to go out and celebrate with everybody. And I want you with me. And you're like, well, I want to crash. So it's, how can we both have what we need?
Yeah.
So maybe it's, you go, I take 15 minutes to walk around the block quietly to decompress, and I'll come in and meet you when I have a chance to catch my breath.
Yeah. See, this
I'm
is
not
so
avoiding
good.
you. I'm not,
mm-hmm.
I'm not uninterested in participating in the celebration. I just need to take a breath.
Yeah. This is exactly what you were talking about before, about taking those creative thinking skills and applying them in these other areas instead of feeling overwhelmed or at the mercy of circumstances or our emotions or whatever, to identify, okay, here's the issue. How could I creatively come up with a solution to deal with it and feel like you have the permission and the freedom to deal with it however you need. Like, I need a day to just be quiet and not talk to anybody. And I can calendar that and I can let people know, or I can make these arrangements ahead of time with people for plans. That's so good, just to be able to think about, okay, again, like you said before, all right, I already have the skills. I just need to apply them in this situation as well.
Right. Really and there are oodles of these skills that you already are good at.
Right.
That can be applied elsewhere. Dan, I don't know what kind of music you play, but if you're a musician, you know that jazz musicians don't always have a set that they go with. Right. And there is their own level of mastery that they need to have in order to be good at their craft. But there's also a level of trust that they need to have in the other people. They also need to let go of ego and follow the music where it goes. And also stop thinking about it so much and go into flow. And the best jazz performances were never planned. So that's like walking out into the world. You're interacting with other people that you haven't been able to plan with. And so how are you going to interact with the world? Are you going to have, a dance, or are you going to have a fight? And so those are different ways of, analogy and metaphor are really powerful creative thinking tactics to take yourself out of your own emotional attachment to something. Think about it in a new perspective, and suddenly the solution becomes evident. So there's another creative thinking tactic, metaphor, which artists love.
Right.
Yeah.
I know that you were actually leading a workshop on this a couple of weeks ago, and thinking about things that get in the way of feeling like we've accomplished or making that impact. I know I have struggled with this idea of potential, of living up to my potential. And then there have been times when I thought, oh, I'm going to be that person at the end of my life where after I die, people are going to say, oh, she had so much potential. Too bad she didn't live up to it. But at sometimes, and then other times I'm like, there's this, I want to get to this thing, but I have to, I can see the ultimate of everything, all the different pieces, but I am only one person and I only have so much time. Talk to us a little bit about how potential plays into all of this.
I have a new dreaded phrase, which is living up to your potential. Because, this is not in any way a reflection on what you were just saying, but I've seen time and again through clients at all levels of success, all levels of age and seniority and expertise, struggle with their potential. Mm-hmm. And it becomes a game of your potential according to whom? Because when you have your whole life people telling you who you're supposed to be, then that's outside of you. That's an outside expectation that doesn't speak to what your inner strengths, interests, desires, and values are. Mm. So, just like redefining what success means, you have to sit back and think about, what does potential mean? Yeah. Potential according to whom? What if it were potential according to you? And, if your family, everybody ends up going into the family business, maybe by not choosing not to go into the family business, you're not living up to the potential. But you're not interested in that business. You want to do something else. You want to work with people in a different way. You want to impact the world. You want to create beauty. And that you don't see that happening in what was predetermined. So are you really not living up to your potential, or are you not living up to an external potential?
Right.
So that's like one of the big things. But then, yes, I think many of us would like to have greater impact on the world in a positive way, but you are only one person. So, what can you do as an individual to leverage your influence? Because that's all you have. Yeah. And then that needs to start at a modest place. What is your current level of influence? And that can grow over time. And consistency, being consistent, is the thing that will help you grow your influence, because people will know what to expect from you. And then you become known as that. And that is what is shared by other people, because you need these other people to share your influence. So as a coach, I have a lot of different interests. I told you my interest in science battle my interest in creative arts. And with that goes hypersensitivity toward, let's say, the environment. I can't cure the environment. I'm just one
these
weak
big person. Issues.
Well, beyond controlling, what I purchase, use, and dispose of, the other thing in my role, what I can do is work with people who are talented in their domain and help them be better at what they do. Help them solve their obstacles more effectively. Help them recognize how to stay true to what they need to not get distracted by these external forces. And if I can help those people be better at what they do, then I'm contributing to that.
Right.
I myself am not solving these problems. But, oh boy, I'd love to work with the people who are trying to save the bees.
Right.
I'd love to work with the people who are trying to creatively and innovatively solve coral leaf die out. Mm-hmm. There's things I can contribute to their thought process and their state of mind that can make them better at what they do. And that's what I can do. So I'm also really clear about where my strengths are. And I get to be creative in how I use them and repurpose them and reframe them. I can't tell you how many different ways I have to talk about the work I do depending on the audience.
Right.
Do you know how many people, if I say creativity, they shut down immediately because I'm not talking about them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
When my whole point of talking about it is to say, no, but I am.
Yeah.
I am talking about you.
Yeah. I love the freedom that comes with the clarity around that, especially for people who do feel, like a lot of our audience are Christians and wanting to contribute, whether to contribute to the world in some way to help, and that feeling of things being so big, like you said, and to be able to have the clarity of, okay, these are my gifts, this is what I can do. And that idea, I love that, of being able to inform and help and encourage or impact one person, two person, three person, whatever my little audience is, and that is contributing in the way that I'm able to contribute, I think is really, really helpful and powerful. I think about Mother Teresa. I remember reading about her, and she was very clear about what she was doing. She was helping individual people, one person at a time, whoever was in front of her. That's what she was attending to. And she frustrated so many people because she would either just not take a meeting or skip a meeting or not be interested in a conversation about, you could make such a bigger difference if you started this institution, if you were part of this foundation, if you organized on a larger level, you would make such a bigger impact. And she chose consistently, no, because then I wouldn't be doing the thing that I can do. And that was a really powerful illustration of, I think, exactly what you're talking about. Because I think it is really easy, it certainly is easy for me to get distracted by the opportunities that come along that sound good, sound like they're going to present more opportunities, sound like they would be more effective. But then I notice, but I'm not doing that thing that I'm like really skilled at, that I really love to do anymore.
We like to measure things.
Yeah.
We like to track things. We need metrics. But yeah, not everything can be measured.
Thank you so much for this conversation, Veronica. It's just, I feel like it's chock full of really practical, helpful things to consider and think about. I know that you work with clients. If there's somebody who is looking for coaching, is that something that you have available, or how would somebody get in touch with you to connect more?
Yes, I do. I do have a little bit of capacity to take on some new clients right now. And so if they would like to be in touch, they can connect with me on LinkedIn or through my website, which is goldfinchleadership.com. And I offer everybody who comes to me a complimentary call to figure out if what they need is what I can help with. I also have an ebook that can be downloaded for free on midlife career transitions through creative intelligence. And it's a roadmap
Wonderful.
for doing some of these exercises that we've been talking about, like discovering your core values, identifying what it is that you want to be spending your time on for your own legacy. And what does legacy mean? Sort of like, what is success? And the different elements of a transition, and really prizing each one, including the in-between. So that's my gift to the world, is to offer that.
Thank you so much for this really wonderful conversation. It's been great talking.
Thank you. You let me geek out on my favorite topics. So.
I'm geeking out too, just talking to you.
And there we go. There's the influence.
There you go.
Right?
Thanks for listening to Be Make Do, a Soulmakers podcast. If you want to go deeper, be sure to visit soulmakers.org and download our free Wise Hearted One study guide with questions for personal reflection or discussion with a group, plus word studies and more.